welcome to the Debrief. This is your weekly check-in on everything happening in state politics and public policy. I'm Donna King. I am editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. Make sure you check out carolinajournal.com. Lots of information about everything that's going on. Joining us this week, Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation. Lots of details, good analysis coming. Plus Jeff Moore, deputy editor of Carolina Journal, and Jim Sterling of the John Locke Foundation, the expert on North Carolina elections. All right, let's jump right in. Cooper is out. Walz is in. Looks like VP Kamala Harris has picked her running mate, kind of out of left field, Governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. Jim, tell me what your thoughts are on this pick for the Democratic presidential ticket.
Well, the Bachelor is over. Cooper did not get the rose. Shapiro didn't get it either, and it goes to Walz, someone that most people didn't really expect on it.
Okay.
Personally, I was assuming that it was going to be Shapiro. He was a guy out of a toss-up state, was good optics, well-spoken, has a lot more kind of middling policies, so it would kind of balance out that ticket.
Okay.
But she instead went with Walz, who, again, is much more on the left of things, very similar to how she ran in 2020.
Sure.
So this puts it more into the camp of the more progressive, more left-leaning part of her party. The Democratic Socialists of America were very happy about that pick, and I think that says a lot for what they expect this administration and this ticket to potentially do.
Sure. Tell me what you think, Jeff. Normally I would think that a candidate would pick somebody that fills in their gaps, so to speak.
Yeah.
But now the Harris campaign is really leaning into this sort of far left persona. Are you surprised? What do you think?
Yeah, I was surprised with the name. It wasn't on my radar. Everyone was
either.
staring at the same short list, that dance card with those 3 names on it, and
Sure.
then this name was not on that card. So I was a little bit taken aback at first, and then thought about it, and it reminded me of Trump's pick for VP in that he picked somebody to double down and kind of get the more support of the ideological base of where he's going. So Trump picks J.D. Vance, and it's kind of a populist conservative that's made a recent name for himself. And Kamala picking Walz here is picking an ideological progressive with a lot of bona fides in the progressive circles, and as governor of Minnesota, and Democratic Socialists of America are happy about that pick.
Sure.
So it reminds me of the doubling down on the ideological base. So they all kind of retreat to their camps, where we have the progressive left over here. We have kind of this surging American first populism over here with the Trump and Vance ticket.
Okay.
So it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense from an electoral standpoint. You wonder if she chose Walz over the others, or if some of the others may have bowed out, seeing that maybe prospects for down the road politically were better for them, and they didn't want to spend the capital here on this race. But we'll see them all out on the campaign trail being surrogates, and it'll be interesting to see the roles that they play here going forward.
Of course. Mitch, that's actually a really good point that Jeff makes. Do you think Cooper, Shapiro, they're keeping their powder dry for another election?
That may be the case.
Okay.
It also may be the case that they ended up lucking out that they weren't the pick, and so don't have to go through this campaign. To me, there's several interesting pieces of this. Earlier you mentioned checking the boxes.
Sure.
From the Democrats' perspective, it may be that he is checking the boxes. She is a woman of color.
Sure.
He's a white guy with white hair. So maybe they say, oh, 2 very different people, that will help us. But of course, as has been said, this is someone who is on the sort of same left flank that Harris is, so it doesn't cover ideological gaps, only appearance gaps, but those seem to be the most important thing to many Democrats. The other things that are interesting to me about this, Shapiro had been the one that we'd kind of seen as the most likely candidate, but I think the fact that he isn't, unless he turned it down, is a sign that the Democrats see you can't have anyone who has any potential tie to being pro-Israel on your ticket. He is Jewish. He has a history of having worked in the IDF or associated with the IDF, which is the Defense Forces for Israel, and that, even though he seems to have disavowed it in recent days, is probably a black mark for him. And then the third piece for me is that this pick, in a way that others did not, would sort of open up the Harris campaign on some policy issues, saying, look, you picked a guy who's the governor of Minnesota, so now we're going to look at Minnesota's policies, which aren't that good.
Right.
Minnesota hasn't been doing as well as some other states. Why'd you pick this guy?
Sure. Well, it certainly gave Shapiro and Cooper a national platform for a future campaign, right?
Right. I mean, there's one benefit to them that's come out of this is every single person that was on that short list now has a national profile.
Right.
They are a household name in a lot of these different areas, and they're out in front of the donors. I mean, people from North Carolina knew who Cooper was but how many people in North Carolina knew Shapiro as like this
True.
household name, or Mark Kelly out of Arizona as someone you would talk around the dinner table with? Now these people have a good presence, they'll be good surrogates, so there is a massive benefit to this for Democrats. However, Walz does open up a lot of issues, specifically the Minnesota riots.
Right. Yes, of course. Yeah. Fill me in on that.
So back in 2020, during the George Floyd riots, Minnesota had a bunch of firebombings. They didn't send in the National Guard till a very delayed time, and they had to retake parts of Minnesota. And Harris has a connection in this when she was bailing out or creating, working with fundraisers to bail out some of these protesters. So the ad basically writes itself, and I've seen a lot of people on the Trump camp already start with that attack already, which is why a lot of them were breathing a sigh of relief with Shapiro being out and this being the pick.
Right.
I think this was a misstep from the Harris team. It is too easy of an attack.
Sure. Do you think that this short list now having high profile is a signal to donors that, look, we got some bench strength. There's hope for the future for the party?
I definitely think that's the case because they've been lacking a bench for quite a while now, especially on the national profile. So this will now elevate a lot of people up. Cooper will now have a lot of name ID if he wants to run, at least on the national front, if he wants to run for something like the U.S. Senate for North Carolina. Shapiro will definitely be able to get more of a name ID if he wants to go into the federal side. Same with Mark Kelly and a lot of these other folks.
Sure. So it looks like Cooper, though, is going to be a big surrogate, going to be out of the state a little bit. What do you think that means?
Yeah, well, some might worry that Mark Robinson's going to step
Right.
in and change some laws while he's gone. And we've had that happen before. Back during COVID, there was a high-profile case of Cooper leaving the state and people wondering and some encouraging acting Governor Robinson to lift the mask mandate, which is something that I personally, I thought, well, I might like that, but it didn't happen. So I think if he didn't take any moves there as acting governor, it's probably not a risk when Governor Cooper's out of the state campaigning, and Robinson has his own campaign to be focusing on as well. But with this, I do think Cooper has kind of a healthy amount of activity in front of him that actually helps him build up political capital. He's going to be helping Democrats, and he's been a pretty loyal and reliable helper for the Biden administration along the way. Whenever they needed a pick-me-up, they could come to North Carolina. North Carolina's been doing great. A lot of great conservative policy that has put it in that position, but Cooper is glad to cut ribbons and have a president come down and give them support. So I think that he's got a lot of support going back in the other direction, and he'll spend that political capital probably wisely. He's made wise political moves throughout his career. He's never lost a statewide race here. And so his capital looks like it's good and dry for 2026.
Sure.
You always have to take with a grain of salt whatever anyone says about whether they're getting into an election or staying out of election or taking a job or not taking a job. I think the whole piece about Roy Cooper now being a surrogate and spending a lot of time on the road outside of North Carolina shows that using the Mark Robinson excuse for why he didn't want to be the VP was certainly silly.
Of course.
We have the weakest governor in the U.S. It's not something I really see as a big issue, even when he was discussing it just for the Veep stakes.
Is that by design, or do you think that that's how this governor has been?
That's actually a lot dating back to North Carolina's history. We didn't really have a strong belief in the executive branch from its conception. So those powers have been doled over time to the governor, but it's still a very, very weak executive branch here in North Carolina.
Yeah, remember, Governor Roy Cooper has had far more vetoes than any other governor in North Carolina history. But that history of vetoes only starts in the 1990s. Up until then, we were the last state to get the gubernatorial veto, and the legislature would love to scale back some of those powers and not have the governor have much power at all.
Very interesting. All right, Cohen, right back to you, actually. State Board of Elections. All right. So investigating a complaint against the PAC of Elon Musk. I know you've been working on this and looking into it. Tell me what you found out.
So this is specific to the State Board of Elections. Nothing from the District Attorney's Office, Josh Stein's office, has really looked into the matter yet. They haven't filed anything on it, but the State Board is looking into the fact that the Elon Musk PAC, the America PAC, has been saying that they were going to register voters. And in some states they have been, but in toss-up states they were collecting more information. States like North Carolina, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan, all of these toss-up states, they were taking a lot of data but not registering voters, which is a pretty big problem. Normally in North Carolina, the only way to do online registration is through the DMV. So there is a way to do it. but they weren't doing that for a lot of these people in swing states. The issue is also going to be in Pennsylvania, because while they did, it does appear that they were registering people, they didn't register with the State Board of Elections before doing that, which is a requirement under their law. So they're in a pretty precarious situation. This could be like a Class 2 misdemeanor for these kinds of situations.
Sure. So what's happened since this complaint's been filed? Are you seeing any evidence that they're responding?
So they have responded. They said they were going to revamp their website, and as of this morning, they have taken off the absentee ballot, and they have taken off the registration parts of their website. So it's very much a blank page, other than an opt-in process for getting information from the PAC. It's very limited, it's very bare bones, and we're going to see what happens after this. They'll probably go back into registrations, but with these investigations going on, it's probably going to be very much delayed.
Do you see partisan fingerprints on this process?
Yes.
Tell me why.
So I don't think the suits themselves are partisan, but the people bringing the complaints are definitely the case.
Okay.
Right now, the State Board of Elections hasn't done any action on this, but the person that filed the complaint here in North Carolina is definitely a left-leaning person with the Muckrakers PAC, I believe, who's filed complaints against people like Cotham and I believe another one out of Colorado, but I'm blanking on their name. Far-left groups have been kind of approaching these matters. It's mostly Democratic attorney generals that are looking into the matter. So it's hard to say that politics isn't playing a part into this. We'll have to see how much is going to play on the State Board of Elections side, because we do have a partisan split of 3-2.
Right. What are your thoughts on this? Is this Elon Musk kind of par
Yeah,
for the
it
course?
kind of it seems true to form for Musk, who is infamous for initiating very large, grand
big
scale,
visions,
the projects and huge visions. And he decided just a couple of weeks ago, after seeing a few things, that he was going to go in and try and influence this election and form the America PAC. There's a rumor out there he's going to spend $45 million a month in support of the Trump campaign, and then it came out that it was actually in the form of this PAC. So with Musk, the size of this project, the quickness of them moving, and with his kind of we'll figure it out kind of genius mindset that he works with, it's not surprising that this big motion created some waves they didn't anticipate, and they're going to have to figure some things out. Kind of slow their roll as they get all their ducks in a row to make sure that the legal things are taken care of, and then continue forward for the next few months to try and have as much impact on the election as they can, which is his original motivation here. So I trust that they'll figure it out, but they're going to run into a lot of trouble. And Musk, ever since he has been wading into these political waters on this side of things over the last few years, has attracted more and more detractors. So everything he does is going to attract some sort of kind of enemy fire. And so it seems in this case it was opposing PACs that don't want this PAC to be in there spreading messaging around a state where they're spreading messaging around.
Sure. What are your thoughts?
It's unclear to me whether there was any intention about having the swing state voter registration not take place as it did in other states. That may just be some of the quirks of how things work from state to state. The investigation will probably reveal whether there was any sort of partisan bias. But the idea of Elon Musk just saying, hey, this is something I want to do, I'm going to do it, let's throw some money at it, and let's get it going and do it as quickly as possible. That's something we've seen with Elon Musk in probably every other endeavor that he's done. The problem that he runs into is when you're dealing with elections, there are a lot of I's that need to be dotted, T's that need to be crossed. There are a lot of rules in place, and that's not the type of thing that someone like Elon Musk is used to having to deal with.
Sure. But really, this focus on getting people registered makes this election about turnout at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, turnout's going to be an important fact on this. If you register to vote in that election, you're very likely to vote in that election. That's something we've seen. That's a common philosophy that a lot of campaigns and a lot of PACs operate under. It's C3s, or excuse me, nonpartisan groups like C4 organizations, PACs, political parties, candidates want to register voters because those voters are very likely to come out and vote in those elections. That's why you'll see a lot of registration drives before ballots go out. Then you'll have the absentee ballot chases and so on and so forth when it comes to these elections.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right, take a look at this. How do you like these apples? All right, one that you see there is Michelle Morrow's logo in her campaign to head North Carolina's Department of Public Instruction. The other is a logo for the State Teachers Union, the North Carolina Association of Educators. Okay, turns out the NCAE has sent a letter, looks like a cease and desist of some sort, against the Morrow campaign, saying she used an apple, and that was theirs. Can't make this up. Jeff, does the NCAE own the image of an apple?
They certainly think they do, and it seems par for the course for them as well, as far as their ownership over the education space. The NCAE has got about 17 or 18% of teachers in North Carolina registered with that group. So they don't represent teachers as a whole in the state, but politically they have taken on that narrative.
Okay.
And so they are no fans of Michelle Morrow. Michelle Morrow is no fan of the NCAE. And so it's not surprising that they found something to go after her on. But it seems pretty ridiculous. Apples have been synonymous with education and teachers and classrooms since as long as I can remember. Everyone has heard the idiom of giving a teacher an apple. They see all the artwork in the elementary schools, anything like that. So it's a really big stretch to have them cease and desist using this. It seems quite petty, but it seems consistent with their operating under the thought that they own the education space, they own the students, they own apples, so you can't use that.
Interesting. I mean, it seems like a lot of people, particularly people running for school boards or whatever, use an apple on their signs.
Yeah, I think Jeff's right on this. The word for it is petty,
Okay.
because she did utilize this in 2022 for her Wake County Board of Elections race. And I'm sure there's plenty of people throughout the U.S., because this claim is about the U.S., not just North Carolina, because it's a
so
Michigan
it's not just
one.
against her. It's
because they filed it in Michigan.
Okay.
That's the original claim on this. So this would go very, very far on this kind of situation. But I would also question the validity of it, since, let's say, there might be a small company with that similar namesake, Apple, I think it
just a
is,
little-
they've made some small products like iPhones and whatnot, but nobody uses those. I don't really see this claim going very far, to kind of summarize. It's nonsensical, and it just seems like they're really just wanting to start a fight with them on this, because they view any kind of ownership over the education field.
Very interesting, which is a little alarming to me as, a parent, because it makes me wonder, do they not think that a homeschool teacher is a teacher? I really don't know exactly. Who can this benefit? You think it'll move the needle in this campaign?
I'm not sure that it'll move the needle. I think if it does, the most likely place it would move it is in Morrow's direction. People aren't necessarily big fans of the teachers union now, and seeing that the teachers union is going to attack a political candidate over use of an apple is just going to seem absurd. Now, there may be some viable strategy in that they think, okay, we've got a lot of money we could throw at this. Let's make her waste money on lawyers having to fight this. So maybe that's part of the calculation. But I think in most respects, as has been said, this is going to be seen as petty. If it moves anyone, it'll be the people who are sort of lukewarm about Michelle Morrow to go, well, the teachers union's mad at her. Maybe that means I should like her. And so I don't know that it'll have a big impact one way or the other, but maybe in Morrow's direction. When this story first came up, I thought maybe there is some sort of specific apple with some writing in a specific font, and Michelle Morrow took it and put it on her website or put it in a mailer. But no, it seems to be they just don't think she should use any apple, and that just seems crazy.
That is. All right, here's a quick look at what the NCAE said in their letter, so you can hear directly from them. And take a quick look. And then Michelle Morrow, in her response, was very quick to distance herself from the NCAE, regardless of what fruit they put on their put on their flyers.
Yeah, maybe she wants to say, hey, if the apple is yours, I'm going to need to pick a different fruit, maybe an orange or something.
All right, well, good. So as we sit here in Carolina Journal's studios, rain from Tropical Storm Debbie is just really blanketing eastern and central North Carolina. Certainly paying close attention to that. Power outages has really kept Duke Energy busy over the last 12 hours or so, but it's been a rough week for Duke Energy in general. Tell me what happened with that Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yeah, rough week in court, and this is something that actually goes back about 10 years.
Okay.
At that time, in 2014, a company called NCAE Carolinas, which despite the name is actually based in Florida, they're a competitor. They build power plants and try to make money off of electricity.
Sure.
And so they, at that point, built a natural gas facility in Kings Mountain, the first of several that were coming on board in the Carolinas. And at the time, Duke, which owns the transmission lines, signed the agreement so that the transmission lines would be used for this NTE plant. And at the time, apparently, according to the court records, didn't think of NTE as much of a competitor at all. But not too long afterward, they realized, oh, the plant they're operating is more efficient, more cost effective than our plants. This could be an issue. And at some point, not too awfully long into NTE Carolina's operations, Duke realized, oh, we might have some competition for this long-term contract to provide power to Fayetteville, the city of Fayetteville. And so Duke ended up keeping Fayetteville's business, but NTE Carolinas went to court saying, look, they were anti-competitive. They cut off this deal to have transmission from our power plant in Reidsville, and it was all done so we would not get this Fayetteville contract. A U.S. District Court judge threw the case out, said, no, this is just competition. Duke's doing what it would normally do in competition. But the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals this week reversed that ruling, a unanimous opinion saying, look, we're not going to say what Duke did was anti-competitive. But there's enough evidence out there that suggests that it really could be beyond the bounds of what's acceptable legal competition. This needs to go back to a trial court. A jury trial needs to take place, and a jury needs to decide whether Duke was engaging in, I think it was described in the opinion as good old-fashioned competition, or whether they were doing illegal anti-competitive things to hurt NTE Carolinas. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as that case now goes back. And we've been talking about, and Jeff's been reporting about some of the big energy changes. All of this is stuff that was happening 5-10 years ago. So if you're looking at what Duke is doing now to comply with carbon plans and all of its plants, that's sort of what's happening today. This case is about things that were happening 5-10 years ago.
Sure. You have been covering energy, a particular interest in that. Tell me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so maybe if they had the foresight back then, they would have appreciated the efficiencies of those natural gas plants a little bit more, and they would have realized how much they'd factor into their whole planning process now, because they actually have to put the carbon emissions reductions, those targets, and the carbon neutrality kind of into their planning for distributing their different resources. So I've been reporting a lot on the generation mix that they're looking at as far as complying with the carbon plan. They've pushed back some of the target dates on the emissions reductions, but for this story, it's an example of how messy just these heavily regulated utility spaces are. It's a necessary monopoly. We used to have Duke and Progress Energy and have some Dominion Energy in there, and so there's consolidation, and Duke is almost synonymous with the state of North Carolina in so many ways. But when you talk about a jury trial, I just imagine if ratepayers were ever afforded the opportunity to be on a jury where they got to weigh in on what their power bill is, they may have some things to say about how they form their mix of energy generation and how much it costs and how reliable it is, especially now with the tropical storm going through. People appreciate having the lights kept on, and we all appreciate the road crews that are out there doing that, but paying for the power at the end of the month is something that is more and more eating into our paychecks. So
oh my gosh,
I wonder if a jury trial could ever be organized to go over how those
the
power
cost of
bills are.
energy really is going up. I mean,
And good luck finding a juror who doesn't pay an electric bill.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a really good point. But utilities are messy. I mean, we're just talking about that. You know, is there space in the free market for a free market philosophy in utilities?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and a lot of my family's been in utilities. I've grown up around people that have worked in the industry. It's a weird market, and the laws are very unique in that regard, that there is very little competition that can happen here.
Right.
Like Duke and Progress Energy.
You can't just start up an energy company.
No, because the infrastructure there would be almost the biggest mess you could imagine. Because imagine if you had Duke lines, and then you had third-party group lines, and then you have your other competitors, and you have to market that out and see which areas can have it, which people can't. It would be the internet issue like Google Fiber on steroids. It would just be a nightmare to happen. That's why we have the current weird situation they have here, where there's some competition that's allowed, but not much.
Very interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's an interesting thing to sort out, because Duke owns the transmission lines. As they say, this is a vertically integrated company that owns everything. But a company like NTE Carolinas says, okay, we're going to build a plant, and our plant's going to be good. But to get their power to the customer, you need to use those transmission lines. So you need Duke basically to say, okay, regardless of whether you're going to beat us on competition, The rules say you've got to use our transmission lines, and a lot of what this case is about is NTE Carolina is saying the only reason you cut off our use of the transmission lines in 2019 was you saw we were more competitive, and we were going to take your big customer, the city of Fayetteville.
Very interesting. All right, we're going to be watching this really closely. As we sit here, of course, today, tomorrow, UNC-Chapel Hill, potentially choosing a new chancellor. Give me the details.
So the UNC Board of Governors is meeting tomorrow to discuss and elect the chancellor for UNC-Chapel Hill. If you remember, several weeks ago, we had a lot of national attention at UNC-Chapel Hill because we had the anti-Israeli protests, pro-Palestinian protests, and they're taking down the American flag.
Right.
And the interim chancellor, Lee Roberts, formerly served in the McCrory administration as budget director about 10 years ago.
Wow. That's hard to believe it was
that
long ago.
Is an investment manager, very high repute guy, had a great little bout of leadership during that tumultuous time where we had protests in college campuses across the country. He personally marched back into the quad of the campus, flanked by law enforcement, to personally replace the flag. Yes. And so he received lots and lots of accolades for his leadership and his steady hand during that tumultuous time. So I suspect, I don't have any clear indication, but it would seem there are a lot of people that became fans of his that didn't even know, but wow, this is great leadership. Install him as the chancellor permanently.
Right.
And so tomorrow they're having that meeting. They will elect a chancellor. It could be Lee Roberts. I haven't seen any indication that there's any other competition.
Right.
It is a matter of him. Is that a position that he wants to do? He's done a few different things. He leads an investment company, very successful guy, very much well liked, especially after the leadership he exhibited a couple of months ago. So we'll see if it is in fact him, and his stock is rising, certainly.
Seems like it. What do you think?
I would be shocked if it's not Roberts, to be honest with you. But I've been wrong before. I mean, I thought it was going to be Shapiro for the VP.
Well, yeah, you never know. You never know. Now, this is your alma mater. He really had that, one of those moments that anybody with a political ambition, perhaps, would love to see on their resume. That walking into the quad with security, put the flag back up. You think he's got political aspirations?
Potentially. I think he comes from a very political family. His grandfather was a major congressman. A well-known story of dying in a plane crash. His uncle is or was the head of a major lobbying firm, one of the biggest lobbying firms in D.C. His mother, of course, Cokie Roberts, was a longtime political TV journalist. So he is part of that atmosphere in terms of having the political background. He himself, though, has been a person who's been a little bit more behind the scenes. He was in the McCrory administration, but it was as the budget director, not as someone out there doing the politics. It's someone keeping the books. He's been in the private sector for most of his career, and basically came to this UNC-Chapel Hill job because he was on the board of governors for the university system, and I'm sure that Peter Hans, being the president, saw him and said, hey, this is a guy who's very capable. Let's see what he could do at UNC-Chapel Hill. So perhaps he would like to do something like this for a while and then get back to the private sector, or maybe use it as a springboard for politics. It's not as if he's an old guy. He could certainly use this if he wanted to have a career.
His measured response was actually well noted across the U.S.
Yeah.
He was not very aggressive in this. He was just very focused, very clear on this. And his walkout to raise the American flag, taking down the Palestinian one that the protesters had put up, it was well recognized. I had people from other parts of the state at a conference I was at talking to me about it and how impressed they were about his style and leadership on this.
Right. Well, that makes me think he's not going to do politics. I mean, I don't know if there's space for that kind of measured.
Not in this politics, I'll tell you that.
I know.
And there's a saying about the people who are the people you would want in political positions. They don't get there because the people who are willing to do the things you need to do to get to top political positions, they don't necessarily have the character.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's Lee Roberts has been in the kind of the background doing his own thing. Maybe his family's history in politics kind of taught him that, you know what, it's better to operate kind of back here and not necessarily out in front of those most political arenas.
Well, and speaking of people in university positions, how many times over the years has someone said, let's get Mitch Daniels to run for president, who became the president of Purdue and then basically said, nope, I'm done. I'm done. I've done my political stuff.
Sure. All right. Very interesting. We're going to be paying close attention to that. You'll certainly find the results on CarolinaJournal.com. But head over there for anyway. We've got lots of opinion, great cartoons, good news coverage, everything we've been talking here is all right there on carolinajournal.com. Thanks so much for joining us.